On the edge of the contested sector, 4 separate fleets enter, all from different houses. They jump inside the edge of the sector and they begin their assault. Without a single word, they accelerate towards the planet that had just finished terraforming. There wasn't even a colony on the surface yet, as massive ships were currently raising themselves just above 20,000 feet and heading towards space. Their job now done, they move on to the next one. They do not belong in a war zone anyway. The human fleet began to immediately position itself, and they had to hurry. The Calubra ships were moving fast, very fast, much faster than before. Plus, there's just so many of them. The computers start to calculate aboard the human ships, and they can see that the enemy forces outnumber them more to 40 to 1 against the humans, all of them priming weapons in anticipation. The Calubra ships are not holding a specific formation. Instead, they seem to be approaching as fast as their engines can send them. This puts the corvettes and destroyers out in front of the rest of the Calubra. These smaller ships are difficult to hit with their main guns, as they're just very, very maneuverable by any aspect. As more ships enter the system, a ship enters the system. This is a familiar ship they have seen before. It's the leader's dreadnought, and it has just jumped in. It immediately begins to release all the ships attached to it, and they begin to move in. It also begins to charge its weapons as it moves forward. As it charges forward with surprising speed for something that large. Several Calubra ships seem to get closer to it. Whether to protect it or use it as its own protection is unclear, but mainly its cruiser class and a few battleships around it. They seem to be flanking the dreadnought on all sides. As the Calubra ship gets into effective range, the humans are unable to wait for the last 3 or 4 ships to get into formation. Drones are launched, and torpedoes begin to leave their tubes en masse. Main guns don't wait to fire and begin to launch their projectiles as well, and this fills space with a wall of destruction heading straight towards their advancing adversaries. Once again, the Calubra need to hold fire due to the range of their torpedoes. They had been told to use their own torpedoes to counter the human one, yet their desire to kill overran most of their higher brain functions. Disregarding the human shots, they believed that their point defenses could simply handle the massive amount of projectiles heading their way. Well, they were partially right. The point defense particle weapons streak across space in a dazzling light show. Not realizing that human torpedoes are armored made it difficult to destroy them. Many of the corvettes were easily overrun at this point, as they didn't realize that their point defenses were completely inadequate. This, along with the splitting of fire between torpedoes and drones, made the job much more difficult for their point defenses to score any type of hit, especially on torpedoes. Calubra ships danced across the ether of space to avoid the main gun rounds, creating a strange ballet of metal moving around while it tried to avoid one hit, firing another, and also trying desperately to shoot at something that was coming towards it. Even the dreadnought had to adjust course, as the amount of projectiles could be absolutely devastating. On the bridge of the Calubra dreadnought, a dozen of the former Great High Grand Leader's bastard children were taking control. The one in charge, the captain, was the eldest son, who, like others, was trying to prove his place and claim his title of Great High Grand Leader. He was told to stay on course, not to be a coward and face the enemy. Yet he wasn't so stupid as to allow pride to force him to take an entire combat load to the face of a ship that he felt a lot of pride being able to captain. The human ships continued to pump out a surprisingly high amount of ordnance. The magazines were being emptied as soon as they were loaded. From corvette to cruiser, the defense fleet just kept trying to target and fire as fast as possible. The main guns began to show signs of heat, but all they could do is fire and pray. The Calubra ships began to get into effective range now, and they had a surprise for the humans. The Calubra battleships had a main gun that was a massive particle laser. The issue outside of its limited range was the fact that you had to point the ship directly at what you wanted to shoot at, as it was a fixed weapon, and they needed it aimed directly in order to strike its target. However, they believe seeing this weapon strike will be enough to make the humans surrender, so they power up. The charging of the cannons did not go unnoticed by the humans. In fact, the intel analysts had already discovered this weapon on the dead Calubra flagship from a few months back. When the cannon was about to discharge, the humans fired all main gun rounds at it in an attempt to try and get the helmsman to flinch and simply whiff the shot. And along with that, any ship in the potential kill zone could simply move at that point. The speed of the shot was only countered by range. Unlike projectiles, the beam only needed 4.1 seconds before impact. This did not give much time for evasive maneuver. Unfortunately for the human cruiser, or fortunately, depending on which way you look at it, they ended up having a scorch mark along its port ventral side as the beam glanced the armored hull. Seeing this weapon made the human fleet clench just a little harder. The only true reprieve on this was that the Calubra battleships were now glowing red and white from the energy discharge. One of the Calubra ships tried to fire again and found out exactly what a critical overload is like, as it simply exploded in a ball of blue energy. This did not stop the Calubra from advancing. This is bad, as the human fleet is quickly running out of torpedo. The drones are causing havoc, but they are very fragile. Yet that fragility is not seen by the Calubra fighters, as they find out as soon as they're launched, they find themselves completely outmatched by the drone's maneuverability. And even the small missiles of the drones are damaging or even destroying a few corvettes and frigates out of sheer massive impact and numbers. On the bridge of the Lost in Translation, one of the comms officers yells to the captain that the smaller ships are either out or almost out of torpedoes. At this point, only the cruiser and torpedo frigates had enough left to just keep firing as they are, and the gunnery officer stated that they had 2 volleys left and that's it. The captain said, "Don't worry, you know I've always got a card to play." At that, the last of the torpedoes is launched, and the captain orders, "Operation Booby Trap, commence." And with that, 24 mines explode randomly inside the Calubra formation. The explosions themselves scorch holes in the ships that are closest to them as the very, very short-lived nuclear fireball comes out. The debris from the ships being torn apart scatters into the other ships, some floating harmlessly past the ships, others crashing into the side and crippling or destroying the other ships they collide into. Those outside the blast radius believed that they were safe for a moment, even though their sensors were a little messed up. That is, until hundreds of spikes of depleted uranium began to turn their ship into spaghetti strainers. The humans cheered as they continued to fire the last few main gun rounds they had, trying to capitalize on the Calubra fleet, as they believed the Calubra would stop and salvage their crippled compatriots. But they did not stop. They did not slow down. The only ship to launch are even more fighters. Fighters that tried to get close and personal with the human fleet, believing now that most of the drones were simply gone and they have a chance to gain their glory by destroying the human fleet, tearing them apart at point blank range. Or they would if the human point defense cannons and tertiary guns weren't still fully operational and fully loaded, and simply put up such a screen that nothing was able to get close. The few able to get into effective missile range would simply launch their missiles and just watch them explode right across their face, right before getting their faces blown off themselves. Aboard the cruiser, The captain could see how close the enemy had gotten. With torpedoes and main guns rounds exhausted, and the mines not stopping the enemy, he only had his secondary, tertiary, and point defense guns to hold the line. That wasn't enough. That is when he saw a notification on his console. They had arrived. Slamming his hand down on the console as the cruiser lurched to one side to avoid a Calubra main gun round, he spoke into the mic. "This is the Lost in Translation to approaching human fleets. We need you. Now." A voice came back over the radio that the entire fleet recognized. It was the Admiral. "We are there." With massive bursts of energy, Earth's main fleet arrived with support from multiple other fleets of other sectors. The combined fleet turned the situation of nearly 30-1 into a 2-1 fight. The Calubra ships instantly began to fire on the ships that were arriving inside the system. They were shocked. Inside the system was a very dangerous maneuver, as if you screw up the slightest little bit near a gravity well, you can kiss your fleet goodbye. Yet now, both fleets are only double visual range from each other. This meant that in space combat, they're at point blank range. Although when a ship comes out of FTL, it takes about a minute for the power to shift safely from the FTL engines to all other non-critical systems. The Calubra began to adjust to the new threat as this time passed by. When the enemy began to get firing solutions, they suddenly realized that the human ships are not simply idle. They are already getting in formation as more human ships arrive, to include 2 human dreadnoughts flanked by 4 battleships apiece. The Calubra begin to fire everything they have left as space was once again filled with human metal and Calubra desperation. On several human frigate, parts began to spin. The Calubra didn't pay much attention as there was not enough energy to fire a particle beam. And as space filled with ballistic projectiles and torpedoes from both sides, drones were sent out in such mass that they turned into a cloud of death. The Calubra's hunt for honor and glory had placed them here. The Dreadnought's captain believed that they can still cripple the human fleet, leading to a Calubra victory in the other 3 sectors that are being hit. Well, he was partially right. In 2 out of those 3 sectors, the arrival of additional human ships created a standoff. Those 2 sectors did not get the arrival of battleships or a dreadnought to back them up, meaning they did not have the large weapons they needed to truly pound someone's face in. The new ships coming in passed by those that had depleted their ammunition and set up a line, making their own formation so that the formation itself did not actually break. And now that they had even more, the formation was much larger. This allowed for overlapping defensive fire, meaning almost nothing could possibly get through to even touch them. The Calubra fleet still needed to get close to maximize their weapons, and this gave humans first shot advantage, and that should never be underestimated. This, along with better accuracy, better weapons, made sure that the sheer numbers of the Calubra did not rule the battlefield. However, the fight between quality and quantity left both sides need to pull back and rearm. This would leave no clear winner, as the Calubra fleet was still hurting from Operation Booby Trap and the excessive amount of ammo they had to expend just to get close. The humans were forced back to near lunar orbit around the planets they were trying to protect, relying on the added firepower of the orbital defense grid to supplement their dwindling ammo supplies. This meant they have to surrender a few stations. However, the automated defense systems will make sure that the price of taking said stations will be just too damn high. The 4th sector that was attacked almost the exact same time as the 1st. Yet things did not go the same way as all the others. Before the battle even kicked off, a strange new ship had entered the group, one no one had seen before. This ship was nearly the size of a battleship, yet its complement of weapons made it look more like a cruiser on steroids. The quad torpedo launching stations / turrets, numbering 18, fixed main gun rounds coming out the nose, numbering 3, secondary cannons on turrets, numbering 22, tertiary guns, numbering 16, and point defense pulse cannons, numbering 38. Along with this strange array of weapons, the armor design was strange as well. There was no flare at all. It was just gone. It is just stripped down to the most practical of designs. There's no clear observation deck, and only more armor and guns where it should be. Along with that, there were massive bays down both port and starboard sides with double sets of doors to make sure there was no sudden depressurization, and these held Lord knows what type of items. This vessel, that seemed much more human than Calubra, had one purpose: to kill. Period. Along with this strange ship, a half a dozen redesigned destroyers that seemed to take their same inspiration from the cruiser, each of them completely covered in weapons, yet seemed to be much lighter on armor. Before the jump, the captain of the cruiser told the combined fleets, "If you want to survive against these insane hairless murder monkeys, you need to follow me and listen to what I say." Being that his name carried a lot of weight since he was the first one to ever survive an encounter with the humans, they listened, at least for a while. Many of the seniors, the older elders, did not take kindly to this brash young captain as he contradicted many of their orders. Thankfully, his former instructor, now admiral, backed up anything he said. Unfortunately, those stuck in their ways just would not change, at least not until they have to. They had decided that they would hit a two-pronged attack overall. Since the others didn't want to listen and the admiral didn't want to talk, they would just have to work around the stubborn jackasses. Looking at the star chart, this sector was unique in that there was an odd nebula that rotated the star just like a planet, but it was easily the size of a dozen gas giants. Once inside, sensors were almost completely useless. The only thing they could use in any type of navigation was gravitational fields. They could pick up those anywhere. A single ship just doesn't put off enough mass to be picked up as a gravitational field. Even the energy pulse of this ship would be completely absorbed by the nebula as they jumped in, yet they wouldn't be able to know how close or how far they are from anyone else until they got almost clear line of sight. The only issues, once you're in, you can't jump out. You have to fly out. This was fine, as they had no intention of pulling out. When the fleet arrived in the system, the battle began the same way as all the others. Slinging of metal and energy as the Calubra fleet moved into range. Unknown to the human, something else was slithering into their house. Inside the nebula, the ships arrived. Their orders were simple: locate the cruiser, as it would be the main ship for this push, and follow. If they can't find it, lock onto the closest gravity well and head for it. That should be the closest planet. The planet is an industrial agricultural world, meaning that they had to be ready for a multitude of possibilities, as they didn't specify what might be down on the planet. Almost the entire group of Calubra ships were able to link up inside the nebula as they made their way towards the planet. Surprisingly, they picked up their last straggler on the way out. Breaching the nebula, all weapon stations were already ready for the party ahead. The moment They breached the nebula. The fixed main guns targeted the orbital defense satellites and fired in volleys. The satellites exploded, one right after another. One satellite, one volley, and they popped them like zits. The destroyers escorting took care of the station that was close by. They didn't bother taking it. They just destroyed it right there. The cruiser itself was making a straight line towards the planet, and there was no deviation unless it simply had to rotate to fire at a new target. The cruiser's point defense turrets blasting away any return fire while still moving straight towards the planet. The destroyers simply took out their target, came in and protected the cruiser, flanking it on all sides to keep it safe. The human ships in the sector could see the Calubra ships leaving the nebula. One of the captains was noticed saying, "That slippery snake." With that, a portion of the human defense line is broken off to engage the young captain's forces. They figured a one-on-one fight, human versus Calubra, would be plenty. The young captain is stoic as his ship breaches the thermosphere and heads straight down. The ground-based weapons begin to fire, and the cruiser sends out its countermeasures and retaliatory strike. This was done as a whole row from stem to stern opened up on either side of the ship and fired over 100 missiles. These missiles sent to intercept anything coming in, and if they didn't intercept anything, to continue to the launch sites and destroy them. Once the cruiser is inside the mesosphere, the cargo bays are open as the ship levels off. As it does, shuttles begin to pour out from either side, coming out like wasps after a nest has been disturbed. They're small, light, yet heavily defended shuttles scream towards the planet. Once they're all clear of the cruiser begins to rotate again, facing its stern towards the planet. Alarms sound inside the ship only for a few seconds before massive flares come out from the stern of the ship. Fusion torches erupt with enough power to push the ship back towards the exosphere. On the way up, the helmsman adjusts course a little bit and takes a few pot shots at the approaching human ships. He actually got a direct hit. Beginning to break free from the planet's gravity, the cruiser joins the rest of the battle group and begins to spam out massive amounts of torpedoes and ballistic projectiles. The high quantity is enough to force the human ships to begin withdrawing as they're getting overwhelmed quickly. The crew of the cruiser is so happy with the outcome that they almost didn't notice the bright flash off in the distance. Multiple flashes, in fact. But this flash in particular wasn't the initial, it was a secondary. The flash happened to be the last time the young captain would ever see his old teacher. The distraction they were actually fighting in worked too well, and the Calubra fleet was now getting torn apart because of the minefield and the insistence on the amount of lead being put in the air. The captain cursed out loud as he believed he was putting pressure on the humans, enough to take it away from their own fleet, but it turned out it wasn't enough. The admiral's battleship was now 3 much smaller pieces of floating debris. This enraged the captain to the point he said something he didn't think he would during the battle. "All weapon stations! Fire at will!" On the humans' flank, alarms started going off like crazy. The cruiser and its complement of destroyers began to fire as fast as their stations could handle. Now the humans have to fight a fleet at the 12, and seemingly a very pissed off group at their 5 o'clock low. Realizing that they had truly and utterly been flanked, the humans tried to reset their formation, although being able to do that under fire is a very, very tall order. The Calubra cruiser's main guns all fired simultaneously. This caused the ship to lurch with every shot due to the amount of mass being projected out. Yet it proved devastating to the human ships. At the range they were at now, only the smallest and most nimble ships were able to move in time without catching anything. If they were too slow, they'd be perforated from stem to stern. The human fleet admiral had no choice at this point. With surprising grace, they began to retreat. Using the retro boosters, they didn't move as fast as they wanted, but they could at least keep from exposing the weakest part of their ship to the enemy. Seeing this move, the young captain sent a message to the rest of the fleet. "Their defenses are broken! Let the slaughter begin!" With that, every Calubra ship charged at flank speed towards the human fleet and planet. Their recklessness allowed the human torpedoes and drones, along with the gunners, to secure a few more kills, yet the closer the Calubra got, the higher the chances of taking down a human ship. Maneuvering as best they could, the human ships started using one of the moons as cover from the incumbing main force. That meant, without catching fire from that side, they could focus more on the young captain and his battle group. Though the humans were running very low on ammunition, they still had enough to cover themselves. Because of this, they sent everything towards the young captain. Under increasing fire, the young captain's group was stalled as one of the destroyers simply exploded. The remainder of the drone fleet was coming towards them in a huge swarm. The young captain had seen this move before, ordering his ships to hold and pull back to regroup. This gave the gunners more time to redirect all torpedoes to intercept the human wall of torpedoes that was coming along with the drones. That left the drones themselves for the defense grid. The drones began to explode in a massive fireworks display, and those that weren't struck soon enough were able to get their missiles off before getting destroyed, and this added to the fireworks as the missiles impacted the hull. This was absolutely nothing to the cruiser's hull that it couldn't handle. The destroyers, on the other hand, are a completely different story, as two more exploded in the formation. Realizing the situation, they all decided to withdraw, and the battle was over for now. Only for now, the young captain thought. The remaining Calubra fleet that was in the sector aimed for the opening that the young captain and his motley crew had created. While some ships pulled security, others sent their shuttles to drop even more personnel off, along with heavy equipment. They all thought that the surface will soon turn from the brown-green, with the streaks of blue across, into a deep shade of red as they painted this planet in human blood. With the Calubra admiral lost with all hands on his ship, and the young captain showing his ingenuity, the rest of the fleets looked to him for guidance, as they had all decided that they would field promote him to admiral. The young admiral immediately got to work. He sent ships back to Calubra ships for repair and resupply. He reconsolidated his forces, retrieving the wounded, and sent them home to recover so they could get back to the battlefield, getting as many personnel and as much equipment on the ground as possible, all with a slight tear in his eye as he remembered his mentor at that point. Feeling the loss, he only hoped that he could live up to what his mentor believed he could become. On the other side of the planet, the human fleets try to lick their wounds. Even with the additional forces from the other sectors, they could not hold the line. The remnants of their combined fleet, along with the remains of the planetary defense grid, set up hasty repairs and started to get ready for the next push. The fleet admiral wishes the core fleets had shown up to his sector instead, but he can't worry about that now. Receiving the confirmation reports, he realized that the snakes have made planetfall and now control over half the space above the planet. He has to send a message that he dreaded he would never have to send. Picking up the hand mic, he sent out a message, and after confirming his identity, he says, "Snake in the grass."